Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our January 2025 regular board meeting. I'd like to welcome everyone and start off in a good way by recognizing and acknowledging both the Esquimalt and Songhees nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we come here together to work through our board meeting agenda. Trustees, I'm going to turn to you for approval of the agenda. May I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Bayo. And a seconder, Trustee Kwan. Any changes or amendments to the agenda? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of the agenda with a show of hands, please. And that is unanimous. Thank you, trustees. All right, we have a set of minutes from our December regular board meeting and a recommended motion. May I have a mover to move those minutes and a seconder? Moved by Trustee Kwan, seconded by Trustee Gagnon. Any changes or amendments to the minutes? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the December regular board meeting minutes with a show of hands. And that is also unanimous. Thank you, trustees. Okay, do we have any business arising from those minutes? I don't see any hands, so I'm going to move us on, trustees, to the next item. We don't have any presentations this evening, but we do have one item of correspondence under B1. I suggest that we pull that for discussion. And so this is a letter from the City of Victoria to ourselves, asking for some information on how our district supports learning around unregulated substances. And so, trustees, my suggestion would be that that we respond, and that much of this is operational in nature. So the response would, my suggestion would be a response perhaps that is supported by the superintendent, who will have that operational knowledge about the way that substances are woven into the curriculum and how students learn about substance and so on. But looking for some direction. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Not sure if I'm assuming we need a motion to do that, or guess looking to the superintendent to see if we do need one.
Yeah, my suggestion is that we do move a motion just to give some direction. But superintendent, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm happy to receive a motion from the board. I'm also prepared to craft a draft response and send it out to the board for further edits.
Sounds great. Okay, so trustees, should we pass a motion just making that official then? So something like that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the superintendent to draft a response for the board's consideration. Something like that, or a response to the letter dated 24th of December 2024 from the City of Victoria for the board's consideration. I suppose we better be specific about what response it is we're talking about. And if that is satisfactory, I would be looking for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Trustee Painter, seconded by Trustee Kwan. I just want to pause for a moment and just check in with the Secretary Treasurer. Were you able to capture that motion?
I think I got it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay. Any discussion? Okay. Seeing none, all those in favor with a show of hands, please. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much, trustees. Thank you, superintendent. Okay, so next on our agenda is Chair's report. That's under C1A. There was a couple of things that I wanted to highlight. So the report is there for your information. I did want to highlight an ombudsperson's investigation into exclusion across the province in K-12 public schools. It's an investigation that the ombudsperson of British Columbia launched this past week. I believe it was on the 14th of January. And I just wanted to highlight that there is a confidential questionnaire that is available on the Ombudsperson's website. There's a link in the pack up on page 13, the highlighted section to that confidential questionnaire. It's open to families if they want to participate in that, and it's open until the 1st of April of this year. So just want to encourage folks to have a look and take part if they wish in that investigation by the Ombudsperson's office. Yeah, Trustee Peter, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if it would be possible to provide an update to parents directly, either through their school email distribution lists or post it under the parent section on the website so that it is accessible beyond just this meeting alone.
Yeah, great idea. Superintendent, were there any plans to post that on the website, or again, is that something that we could provide some direction about tonight?
Thank you. Through the chair, we can absolutely post it on the website. We can put it in the front, just under news, and make it quite clear for parents.
Thank you very much. I think, Trustee Painter, correct me if I'm wrong, were you also suggesting that perhaps it's also communicated directly through schools, so that individual schools also can share that with their parent population, or was it just the website?
I think the website's a good start. I'd defer to the superintendent's recommendations on whether or not direct email is appropriate.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Trustee Painter, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
I just wanted to add some clarity around that, that it is not specific to our district, that it is province-wide. And so that the survey is being collected from all school districts.
It is indeed, yeah. Yeah, all of British Columbia public schools, K-12 public schools is the focus of the investigation. Okay. And then further to the chair's report, there's also the district annual work plan at C1B. The plan is there for January and for February. I just wanted to highlight in February that we are going to be acknowledging Pink Shirt Day, which is an opportunity to all come together to address and support anti-bullying initiatives and learning across our school district. And so that's there for your information. Any questions that folks have in relation to my report this month or the work plan that's included at C1B? Okay, trustees, we are now at board committee reports. We've got under D1A, draft minutes for information only around the Education Policy and Directions Standing Committee meeting. There were no recommended motions coming out of Ed Policy this month. At D2, there's the Operations Policy and Planning Standing Committee meeting minutes, again for information only, and again, no recommended motions coming from Ops this month. Under D3, we do have a recommended motion coming from one of our advisory committees, the Greater Victoria Foundation for Learning Advisory Committee. The recommended motion is under D3A, that the Board of Education of School District number 61 Greater Victoria asks the Greater Victoria Foundation for Learning to request voluntary revocation of its charitable registration. So I'm going to turn it over. Superintendent, would you just remind me who's presenting this item this evening? Is that you?
Yes, we have Trustee Bio, who is on the committee, and also Associate Secretary Treasurer Lettner.
Sounds good. So who would like to, Associate Secretary Treasurer Lettner, did you want to walk us through what the committee found and the recommendation coming from the committee?
Through the chair, Trustee Bio, were you prepared to take a stab at it?
I can, yep. Yeah, so the committee met to discuss whether or not to continue with the charitable status of this organization that as of yet has not been used by the district at all. Every year we pay part of the taxes to keep it going, but it's been inactive. So the question was, do we continue on the possibility that we might decide to use it? How would we then utilize it? What would that entail? And we looked at different foundations in different school districts and kind of determined that it would be a large investment. It would involve hiring someone to essentially run the foundation, to seek donations, and that it wasn't money we have to put aside. We also looked at, I think it was Langley and Nanaimo's foundations, and found that they both had money going into creating those foundations, or had started in like the 80s when potentially there was a different financial climate. Also, there was discussion in the group about, where we want public education funding to come from, and there was resistance to the idea that companies donate, and you have like gyms named after companies and things, and it's like we need to be providing kind of a discussion of what should be funded by the ministry versus these additional things. And so in conclusion, the committee decided to recommend that we end the foundation. It seems like, from our understanding, it's not something that would be attainable in the next 2 years, which is when we would have to start it. Yeah, if there's any questions, or myself and Julie as well can answer.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Trustee Bio. I appreciate you walking us through the committee's work and their thinking. Trustee Painter, you want to kick off the discussion?
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't part of the conversation, and perhaps if I was, I'd have a different opinion, but right now I'll be voting against surrendering the charitable status. The primary reason being that my understanding is that obtaining charitable status has grown increasingly more challenging over the years. Trustee Bayo, it looks like you've got some information on that.
Yeah, just to be clear, the district itself has charitable status, and so this is separate from,
right.
Like, there already is an avenue for which we can collect donations, and we regularly do. This is like a separate charitable status, and that was a concern that we talked about in the group, but considering that we're investing money in maintaining it, and I believe in Secretary Treasurer can correct me if I'm incorrect, but that we would need to utilize the foundation. We'd be committing to doing it in the next 2 years. Right. So, and staffing it would involve staffing it in a way that could potentially bring back money, would involve hiring someone full-time. That money could only be used to additions, not things we're mandated to provide. So we'd be taking money from our mandated pot and putting it towards additional things. And then on top of that, there was a plan presented in 2010 that had some, like, the business plan, and they were predicting raising like $40,000, $80,000 in a year, which probably wouldn't pay for the person that we would need to hire to staff it now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And yeah, it was mentioned that the charitable status would have to be used within 2 years, or we'd probably lose it automatically. I recognize that. I've had conversations with a number of school administrators who've independently undertaken the process of writing for grants and raising funding. Leslie Lee, who was administrator at George J. when I first joined the board, found grants for 2 playgrounds that would not have been possible at that school otherwise. Another administrator talked about being able to raise several $100,000 for their school when they were in another location. I personally believe, when I did look into this a number of years ago, that there are actually quite a good number of grants out there Also, during the Oak Bay construction project, there were a number of parents who volunteered their time as grant writers and were able to generate a considerable amount of revenue for amenities during the construction process. So I have no doubts that there are funds out there that are readily available that could be used to address outside of core initiatives that would nevertheless significantly improve the opportunities for students. I believe that if we were to do this on a 1 or 2 year basis of actually hiring a grant writer and make it a time limited assessment process for up to 2 years, my understanding is that grant writers are typically able to or we're able to address a certain amount of the grant to administrative processes. So the expectation being that if a grant writer is successful, that position can become self-sustaining going forward. So it would be a matter of allocating a finite amount of resources for a set period of time. And if it does not become self-sustaining, we end it entirely. But to my knowledge, we have never actually tried it in the time that I've been on the board or been attending meetings. It's been talked about. Everyone is super busy. It's a corner of a desk thing, and it never gets off the ground. I think I would prefer to actually take the step forward and try to do something with it on a time limited basis. When it comes to things like naming or use of advertising or branded materials, we already have policies around that. There's also provincial policies around naming rights as well. So we've got a lot of those things already in place to ensure that we don't become a corporate shill looking for the next buck. So I'm not as concerned about that. What I am concerned about right now is that the schools that could probably benefit the most from these grants often are the ones where parents and staff are already fully involved just in delivering what they're doing right now and doing a fantastic job, but they don't have the capacity. And so it comes down to whoever has the capacity rather than where the resources would be best used within the district. And I think that's where a foundation operating centrally could make a significant difference in terms of addressing our equity issues. And we have fully acknowledged that we have equity issues within this district. And I'm happy to step forward and take on the responsibility of sitting on the board if that's what's necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Associate Superintendent. So I don't know why I want to call you superintendent tonight, Julie. Associate Secretary Treasurer Lettner. The floor is yours when you're ready, and then I'll go back to Trustee Kwan.
Thank you, through the chair. So we do have a registered charity status through the district. So I guess the question is, what's stopping, if the board did want to put money towards hiring someone, what would stop them from doing that through the regular charity rather than this separate foundation?
Thank you very much, Associate Secretary Treasurer Lettner. Appreciate that point. Trustee Painter, would you just mind just holding that point? We'll come back to that question in a minute. I just want to give Trustee Kwan an opportunity just to speak to this. And I just want to remind trustees, we don't actually have a motion on the floor. And so I will ask that after we have some discussion, if we want to move the motion or want to move another motion, that we consider doing that. But I'm also going to make sure that we pause and give our partners an opportunity to speak to this as well. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, and I guess for me, it's not it's not really about whether we use a foundation or whether we use the charity that is existing with the school district. I think the spirit of, I feel like this was the motion I put forward, and the spirit of this was really about how we could utilize perhaps it better, whether it's the charity within the school district or whether it's a foundation. And I think, you know, examples like Trustee Painter gave where, you know, perhaps we have people who have experience with writing grants for playgrounds, and how we can centralize that and how others maybe can use that same kind of, or we can connect people if there's a way to do that. Or for example, I believe that, you know, Bowker Creek has a couple of people who are really keen to look for some grants for an outdoor classroom, I think, for, you know, around areas and that kind of thing too. So I think for me, I would, and maybe we need another motion as to, you know, using this advisory group to maybe, and expanding it just outside of the foundation and saying, how can we use our charity status, regardless of which entity it is, you know, kind of to create a process, or maybe help establish, you know, how we can do some of these things and connect people who maybe have experience in grant writing, even if we, you know, don't have or aren't going to put budget towards a specific grant writer. There are people out there who are, you know, maybe have some experience and are willing to do it kind of on a volunteer basis. So perhaps maybe it's just expanding this motion to be more about how do we do that and how do we set up processes, rather than who we use to do that or what entity we use to do that, I guess.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Okay. And there's no obligation to move this motion. We can move this motion. We could move this motion and another motion. There's some flexibility here about how we proceed as a board, but I want to just pause here for a moment, if I may, and just open the floor to our partners around the table tonight for any comments or thoughts that you have around all of this. Yes, President Howe, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that we did have a member attend the meeting, and I'm satisfied that we gave our input at that time. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we appreciate you sending a representative. Any other thoughts in terms of the recommended motion or the recommendations from the advisory committee? Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a quick question about whether there's any implications for our school district if we let CRA revoke rather than do the revocation ourselves, if that reflects badly at all, or if we just kind of let it go until that happens.
Yeah, good question, Trustee Kwan. Secretary Treasurer or Associate Secretary Treasurer Lettner, do you have any advice that you could provide the board on that point?
Through the chair, my understanding is that if an option is chosen to become active, that there would be a discussion by the board of the foundation, and then that discussion would be recorded and held in the records of the foundation. And then the foundation records are subject to audit. And so I suspect that it would sit there until they realize that they hadn't heard anything from us around revocation, and follow up to see if that discussion had occurred. So potentially you could have up to 2 years, possibly even longer, before that came about.
So just to clarify, Secretary Treasurer, what you're saying is that in the meantime, while CRA perhaps is getting on top of that, we would be then paying to a small amount, but still be paying to maintain the foundation over those years. And so are you suggesting that a cleaner approach would be to just simply take formal steps to revoke the charity status, or to basically shut it down?
I think they're two quite different decisions. So one is taking the recommended motion and moving forward with it, with the assumption that we wouldn't be using it in the future. I think if there's any chance that we would use it in the future, you could document a conversation around that, but you are, like, under the CRA rules, are intended to take action within the next 2 years. So I think you probably would not want to be not forthcoming, I guess. Like you could have a conversation that there is an intention to move to become active with steps to be taken in a future year, not immediately.
Okay. So there's an option to leave our options open or not. Okay. Trustee Painter, go ahead.
I'll try to be quick. My preference would be to be deliberate, make a choice, hopefully an informed choice, one way or the other. I don't know if we're ready tonight, but within the time, rather than letting something lapse. I feel like that's simply a reflection of where the foundation is right now, where it exists, but not really given much attention in a practical manner. And I'd like to see us move beyond that. I'm entirely open to working with the charitable status of the school district, but I would like to understand what are the distinctions. Clearly, there's got to be something going on. I can only imagine that hospitals, for example, are likely charitable status already, and yet hospital foundations are significant fundraisers. So, what is the distinction? If I could get some clarity around that, that might help. And my last point, and I guess this is an obvious one, but my support for a foundation and fundraising does not negate my commitment to a fully funded public education system supported by the community, the government. But also, I want to be practical and recognize that these students are only going to be students for a finite time. And I'm almost a decade into being a trustee, and waiting for the rainy day hasn't really gotten us anywhere. No one's going to hold their breath waiting for government to start adequately funding education. If we want to make a difference in the lives of these kids, we need to be proactive. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Associate Secretary Treasurer Lettner, did you have an answer to Trustee Painter's query? And then Anave, I will come back. I saw your hand go up, and I'll come back to you after that. Okay, Associate Secretary Treasurer Lettner, I'm gonna get it right one of these days. Go ahead when you're ready. The floor is yours.
Through the chair. I think the biggest benefit of having a separate foundation is the public recognition of a foundation rather than a school district. So similar to the hospital's foundation, would you rather donate to the hospital's foundation or to VHA, right? So I think that's kind of what we figured would be the biggest benefit of doing so. And, you know, if appropriately staffed, there's lots of opportunities to increase the charitable contributions to help support students. That being said, both foundations, other foundations that we had spoken to a while ago, they both said, you know, in order to be successful, you have to have someone to champion the foundation and the work. We can't have someone, you know, part-time or do it off the side of their desk. And so that takes resources, which would take resources away from the classroom. And then the other reason to keep it is, as you mentioned, we don't know how easy or difficult it would be if we wanted to get the charity status back in the future.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you laying out the benefits. Thank you, Anave, for your patience. The floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I just wanted to. Julie actually answered some of my questions. With the funding issues, we would think that to be able to collect more donations is better.
Oh, sorry, your microphone got muted.
I just wanted to say I wanted to agree with what Trustee Painter said, and more funding is better, obviously, with programming issues and such.
Thank you very much. Okay, So I'm hearing consensus that we know that there's value to fundraising and looking for those external supports. But I think the question then really is, how do we go about that? And can we effectively fundraise without maintaining the foundation? Are we confident that in moving away from the foundation on a more permanent basis, that we're not, that we're not losing an opportunity? And do we feel like we're in a good position tonight to make a decision, or do we want to refer this item to perhaps to a standing committee where we can have more discussion, or to another board meeting agenda? Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, I don't know that I feel ready to make a decision on this tonight, I'll be honest. I also would really like, I think we've had some really good feedback tonight, but I would really like the partners that we have around the table to be able to perhaps take it back to their membership and see if there's any additional feedback that they might have on this. I'd feel more confident, I think, maybe in making my decision with that. Having said that, I mean, some may not have an interest in doing so. I guess maybe put that out and see if there is an interest in doing that. But I think further to that, I would really be supportive, or would like to put a motion forward to perhaps continue this advisory committee in another capacity, where we can still look at processes regardless of what entity we're using, on how to better utilize fundraising at a district level with grant writing, or utilizing people who might be experts in connecting people that might need them. So I definitely have an interest in doing that.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Kwan. So perhaps my suggestion would be that we bring this item back to one of the standing committees, perhaps in a month, that allows our partners, if they wish, to take this back to their membership. So maybe we look to the March Ed Policy meeting to have a further discussion. But I want to just check in with our partners that if we did bring it back to Ed Policy in March, to have a discussion, that would give you enough time to go back to your membership to seek feedback, if any. Would March make sense in terms of our partners' timelines? Okay. So trustees, my suggestion would be perhaps we'd make that official then, and we refer the motion formally onto the Education Policy and Direction Standing Committee in March 2025. And if that is to your liking, I would look for a mover and a seconder. Trustee Bio, were you moving that? Thank you very much. And seconded by Trustee Kwan. Any discussion? Trustee Painter.
We're just going to suggest that money matters are usually an ops issue.
They are. I was thinking this also has like an education policy and directions component to it, but it's also, I think, a combined ed ops, I think, in March. So it might be just perfect that way. We can let it land on maybe what we say then. And can we do a friendly amendment and say the combined ed ops in March 2025? Does that suit everybody? Okay, subject to any objections from my colleagues, I'll suggest a friendly amendment that it's the combined education or ed ops meeting in March. Trustee Gagnon, go ahead.
While I appreciate the idea, our agendas are typically still separated for those two, so who would be voting on it should still likely be determined.
Yeah, I'm giving us some flexibility for the agenda setting committee to decide where it goes. So by saying get to the combined agenda, it gives the agenda planning committee that flexibility to have a further discussion about where it's most appropriate to sit, because I think it's a valid point, but not one that I suggest we sort out tonight. Any other discussion? Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to call the question. Again, this is to refer it to either or one of the combined agendas in March. All those in favor with a show of hands. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to move us on in our agenda. We are at D4A. This is again a recommended motion coming out of one of the ad hoc committees. It's a climate action plan Review Implementation Ad Hoc Committee. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, annually allocate funds as a standalone budget line item to implement the district's climate action plan. I just want to clarify that the intention behind this motion coming out of the ad hoc committee is not to replace the ongoing commitment that we have to allocate operational funding appropriately or capital funding appropriately to meet our the goals in our climate action plan, but rather to set aside a pot of money to support the implementation work. So for instance, bringing in expertise or planning assistance to support that implementation. But it by no means is it intended to be a standalone item that's separate from our ongoing obligations to allocate funds, all funds appropriately to support climate action. So with that in mind, we just want to open the floor up to both our partners and trustees to have some dialogue. President Howe, go ahead.
Thank you. The GBTA is strongly in support of any directed funds towards the district's climate action plan. We think that this is a great motion to pass to continue the commitment that the district has made to the climate emergency and responding. So thank you. I hope it passes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. President Massey, and I'm
Well,
sorry,
I would be Vice President Massey.
Vice President? Okay, Vice President Massey, go ahead.
And I just want to say, I think Carolyn said it very eloquently, and I think we would absolutely echo her words because we can't do enough for what's going on in our world these days. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Trustee Gagnon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious because the owl is not always my friend, but is Acting Associate Superintendent Powell there this evening?
I don't know. Associate Superintendent Arts?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. No, he is not able to join us this evening.
Great,
If I may continue, I know that there was going to be students participating in a climate action youth forum at SJ Willis last Tuesday. I was wondering if there was any update on how that went while we are on this climate action topic.
Superintendent or Associate Superintendent, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And through the chair, great question. Thank you. I will ask Acting Associate Superintendent Powell to get an update on how that went. He was there and is the best person to share.
Thank you very much. Okay, Trustee Kwan and then Trustee Painter.
And my curiosity was really around logistics and what that would look like as far as budget. Would it fall under a certain department, or are we suggesting like a single line item for the Climate Action Committee on our budget? How would that work?
Yeah, I think the thought was that it would be a standalone line item, and that it would be a pot of money that could be drawn on as needed and as appropriate, not necessarily just by the through recommendations from the committee, but as needed. So there's various options that might support the work of our climate action plan, but just a standalone item that could be drawn on. The details, again, the motion, the way that it's drafted, would allow us to look at how that fits into the budget, but it's a commitment that we would be layering in that as a standalone item in our budget moving forward. Trustee Painter, I think you were next on the speakers list. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Generally favorable to this. What I would like to understand is what would make this particular ad hoc committee different from other ad hoc committees that we have discussed allocating funds to or have provided funds to in the past. It's great I
Trustee
would
Peter,
prefer,
may I just clarify, this isn't intended to be an allocation to the ad hoc committee, but rather a standalone budget item that could be drawn on to support the implementation of our climate action plan. So this particular ad hoc committee already has a budget to support its work of, I believe it's $5,000. So this would not be for the committee. It would be a standalone budget line item that could be drawn on. And so just to clarify.
okay, thank you. That is helpful clarification. I guess as an aspirational statement, I'm in support of it in terms of actually determining what funds and how it be allocated, how it be accessed, et cetera. I would want to see some sort of a plan of what is to be accomplished that could be updated on an annual basis or something like that. Completely open to the mechanisms, but that plan and the objectives would likely drive the amount of funding that we would want to allocate. So I appreciate it's a bit of a chicken and egg, but usually you got to make the case first, and that's how I would prefer it.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Trustee Kenyo, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify Trustee Painter's suggestion, would you be looking for a request or a plan? Like, I know you said plan, but are you looking for like specific requests that would then get answered by like a budget? Are we looking for a budget request is essentially, because if that's the ask, it's just something that the Climate Action Committee would want to know, that this is something that we need to come forward with to the board in advance of budget discussions.
That would be my preference. And it could be something that, since budgets are addressed on an annual basis, could be developed or reassessed and updated on an ongoing basis. I'm completely open to it, but I'd like to know what we're spending the money on. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, and perhaps we could look to amend the motion like that so that there's some kind of, board approval or some kind of oversight mechanism. The intention is to support the plan that's in place, the climate action plan, and implementing it. And so my expectation would be that any money that was spent from that allocated line item would be for the purposes of supporting the implementation of the climate action plan. So like, for instance, we might, have someone come in and like either do an event or come in and provide some expertise that we don't have in-house, but that we need in order to support the implementation of our climate action plan. Those are the two examples that come to mind where we might be able to utilize the funds that we're suggesting we put aside. I'm not sure if the climate action plan implementation review committee would be the best place to develop that plan, frankly. If it's a spending plan or some kind of oversight and approval, beyond saying, look, the money needs to be used to support the implementation of the climate action plan that the board approved. Perhaps we can wrap that up in the budget process in some way when we're looking at allocating money toward the line item. But again, would be interested to hear more, Trustee Painter, about what you had in mind.
Well, I guess the first question, is it bigger than a bread box? Are we talking $5,000? Are we talking $50,000? Are we talking 500? Is it renewed annually? How do we assess value for money contributed? There's probably a million and one things. Who knows? Maybe we work on the old learning resources to support curriculum development or something like that as part of this funding. There could be any number of things, but I would hesitate to allocate funds not knowing whether it was sufficient or overkill and how we're going to administer it. We're in a situation year after year where we always are squeezed down to the last dollar. So I just want to make sure that we're making good use of it. And by that, I mean that we're identifying what our purpose is and then how we're going to measure the value that we get out of the contribution or investment.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Okay. Any other discussion around this particular item? So again, the recommended motion is that the board annually allocate funds as a standalone budget line item to implement the district's climate action plan. So this would be something that we would be looking at annually, and then funding would be dependent on obviously what is feasible and then what we're trying to achieve. Okay, so I'm going to just pause one more time and then I'm going to look to my colleagues if there are no other questions or comments. I'm going to look to my colleagues to see if there's a mover and a seconder. Okay, would someone like to move the recommended motion? Trustee Gagnon and a seconder. Trustee Bayo. Any discussion, trustees? Okay, all those in favor with a show of hands. All those opposed? Abstentions? Okay, so that's the balance of the board in favor and Trustee Painter abstaining. Thank you very much, trustees, and thank you to our partners for your contributions to that discussion. We're now at E, District Leadership Team Reports, E1, Superintendent's Report. There's a recommended motion to receive the Superintendent's report as presented. Superintendent, is there anything from your report that you would like to highlight for the board?
Thank you. And through the chair, there are a few items that I would like to highlight. My report can be found on page 26. A few of the items, one is that we are in the process of developing common codes of conduct for students at the elementary, middle, and secondary. And again, we're at the development stage. So these draft codes will be shared with schools as per the ministerial requirements. They'll also be shared with rights holders and the Indigenous Education Council as we move forward. The goal is to review as we move through the spring, receive feedback, and then hopefully have them in place if it works out for the 2025-2026 school year. We did begin this process with the personal digital device codes of conduct. Those were common across the district, and we're finding that it would be beneficial to look to having codes of conduct that are common for each of the 3 levels across the district rather than being school to school. So when we're closer to, we will be sharing the drafts. And again, it will be reviewed with feedback to rights holders, Indigenous Education Council, as well as the students, staff, and parents at the school level. Also, sorry, moving on, just want to point out, we had some very successful student representative advisory council meetings. Planning is underway for the second equity, diversity, inclusion, student-led session, and also the wellness fair. So one will occur on April 10th, and one will, the wellness fair will take place at Vic High on the 16th of April. Both are student-led, very exciting to have students lead actions within the district and both in their second time. So lots of learnings from the first ones and then moving forward. And just a final piece of gratitude. So I would like to express gratitude and appreciation to the Oakland staff, the principal and the vice principal, as well as the international program director and international staff and facilities director, manager, and staff at facilities for all of the work that happened throughout the fall, through the winter, and right up to the last few days leading back into the after the winter break to move 9 divisions from Oakland to Uplands campus. From all accounts, it's going very well, but that is a direct result to all of the work that went into making that look and appear as seamless as possible, but it was a lot of effort. And lastly, just a very big congratulations and best wishes to Arch Fraser, who Associate Director of Facilities is retiring. He's been with the district for 35 years. We definitely will miss him. Arch has a great sense of humor and is always willing to step in and help whenever asked. So best wishes. We're looking forward to hearing his great adventures, but we'll miss him throughout the district. So just wanted to make that note for my report.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Appreciate that. Yeah, we are a very lucky district. We benefit from a lot of longstanding staff who bring so much to the table. All right, so trustees, do we have any questions for the superintendent in relation to her monthly report? Trustee Painter and then Anna Vey.
Actually, I'd defer to Anna Vey.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Go ahead, Anna Vey, the floor is yours when you're ready.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. I noticed that you, Superintendent Whitten, kept on referring to the Indigenous Education Council, which has yet to convene. And also, we're having issues around how legislation is being interpreted. So I'm wondering why is it taking so long? What seems to be the issue?
Thank you very much for your question, Superintendent. Go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you. Our intention, our hope, and I believe some emails went out today, is that we have the first Indigenous Education Council meeting February 11th. And with regards to the delay, I think I would need more information, Anna to take away and come back. But I did reference the Indigenous Education Council in it, and that is the hope as that council gets going February 11th, that we'll be able to bring forward these items.
Thank you, Superintendent.
My issue with that is the legislation was passed July 1st, 2024. We are now January 27th, 2025. By the time we convene, it will be, your tentative date is March 4th, or there's a few emails sent out today. My issue with that is how many terms have gone by without this committee meeting? And is this intentional, or is it an oversight, or are you just too busy? Like, it's very problematic. And I would just like to know when and how will this committee be convened, because the IEC in School District 61 is well established. And from my understanding of the legislation, it is to be built by the nation where the district is built on. We haven't had that much consultation or control of even where the meetings are. So I just want to put that on the table.
Thank you, Anna for raising that, Superintendent.
Thank you, and I appreciate that you're bringing this forward, Anna. I will take it away and talk from here. Again, I believe the first meeting is set up for February, but we'll confirm all of those aspects, and also have definitely heard your concern.
Thank you, Superintendent. Trustee Painter.
Sorry, that's me saying I'm good. I've answered my own question.
Okay. Any other questions for the superintendent in relation to their monthly report? All right, seeing none, trustees, may I have a mover to receive the superintendent's report? Thank you, Trustee Bayo, and a seconder, please. Thank you, Trustee Kwan. All right, any discussion? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor of receiving the superintendent's monthly report with a show of hands, and that is unanimous. Okay, I'm going to move us on to E1B, and this is the Enhancing Student Learning Report feedback from the Ministry of Education and Childcare. Superintendent, whenever you're ready.
And thank you Through the chair, the memo can be found on page 28 of the pack-up. We did receive the annual review from the 2024-2025 Enhancing Student Learning Report. The review feedback that we receive is reviewing the report, so it's a report on the report. The memo outlines some of the feedback that we received, most notably, there are 5 focus areas that we receive feedback for, one being the district's approach to continuous improvement, the second being ongoing data and evidence review, both qualitative and quantitative. The third is the ongoing strategic engagement that's focused on student learning. Fourth, alignment, and the fifth, improving equity of learning outcomes for Indigenous learners, children and youth in care, and students with a disability or diverse ability. Each of the 5 focus areas, we received comment on the strength of the report as well as a consideration. And while we received this recently, we are meeting with district members to go over the report. Again, in interest of continuous improvement, look at what we could have or should have included in a report so that we're mindful of what we include in the 2025-2026 report. Some of the feedback that we received is really what was or what wasn't included in the report. It's not always what is or isn't done in the district. And so we learned by looking at the review what we could have potentially included or expanded upon so that it was clear for the people who are reviewing, the review team. And some of it perhaps we included what we didn't need to include. So ultimately what we're looking at in all of the sections is what are we doing to make a difference? Is what we're doing making a difference? How are we evaluating that? And include in the report what we are going to keep doing and what we are going to not do or what we should be starting to do. So again, this is a piece of feedback that we take, we meet as a group, and we look to as we continue to develop the next year's plan.
Thank you, Superintendent. Right, I'm going to open the floor to, again, both our partners and trustees for any questions or comments that you have in relation to the feedback that we've received from the ministry. From the ministry and the committee, which is all made up of ministry representatives and, as the superintendent pointed out, also sectoral representatives. So I believe other school districts are invited to send representatives to take part in those. The work of that committee, reviewing all of the ESLR documents. Does anyone have any questions or comments in relation to the feedback? I'm noticing that there's some things that perhaps we can glean just in terms of trends and in the feedback, and we'd only have so many years of feedback, but there's a few sort of I think areas where in terms of the considerations from year to year, there's perhaps some things that we could take away and build upon when we look at this in I guess June, and in particular around things like how we measure and oversee whether our strategies are actually benefiting or having the expected benefits for students, and how we articulate that in the ESLR document. I'm wondering, Superintendent, if it's possible for, once you've had that opportunity to engage at the district and sort of school-based levels around the plan and the feedback, whether it's possible for you to come back to the board and just report out what plan you're recommending for taking into account the considerations, and especially those considerations where there is some themes from year to year.
Yeah, thank you. We do have a meeting upcoming to discuss this more fully. I think some of the areas that we are improving or looking to improve on are our alignment with regards to both the horizontal and the vertical alignment. And this is something that I think we've been looking at over the past 3 years. I think with regards to data analysis and areas of growth and areas of focus, Some of the areas, certainly around literacy, we have more data that we can pull in, again, qualitative as well as quantitative, and things that aren't necessarily just on the FSA. And some of the other areas I think that we've identified that we do need to spend more time looking at in numeracy. So we will converse and bring it back, yes, to the board on what has been discussed and where we can continue to look for continuous improvement in what we're delivering and also what we're analyzing.
That would be appreciated. Yeah, I know we noticed, or I did when I looked at the comments again, that there's reflections around how, in particular, around priority students, how it is that we are overseeing and monitoring changes and improvements. So I think I noticed that is a bit of a theme that's coming out of the last couple of years of feedback, and I think one that the board is quite keen for us to, clarify what is our strategy and our approach to that, and then once we're confident in that, then continuing to do that so that we can see the improvement over time. I think that's one of the challenges, is that we change what we include and maybe what we're focused on, and so we lose the benefit of really being able to meaningfully observe change and whether our strategies are actually working. So yeah, that would be appreciated if you could feed that back to us. Does anybody else have any comments or questions around the feedback? Okay. Right, thank you, Superintendent Whitten, for bringing that forward. The next item is under E1C, and this is, again, a recommended motion that the board approve posting the general, non-personal Freedom of Information responses with redactions as required on the school district website. Thank you, Superintendent, for bringing this forward. This is really just a matter of good practice for public bodies to proactively disclose information on the website. The idea, of course, is to reduce the number of FY requests and also to be as transparent as possible and share what we've disclosed. Anything that you want to highlight or share, Superintendent, before I open up the floor for a discussion?
No, thank you. I think you said it very clearly what the purpose is. Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to first just open the floor to our partners and trustees. If you have any questions, comments, or thoughts you want to share, and then I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Okay, trustees, may I have a mover? Thank you, Trustee Gagnon, and a seconder. Thank you, Trustee Bayo. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor with a show of hands. And that is unanimous. All right, thank you very much, everyone. So that brings us to D, and this is trustee questions. Trustees, this is an opportunity for you to ask questions, and the staff will do their best to respond. And if they can't respond to the question tonight, they'll come back. Do we have any trustee questions? Okay, I have one. I'll surface. This is just a point of clarification around what our internal processes are for identifying students with IEPs who have technology needs. I'm wondering how we go about that from a pedagogical perspective, and then once we've determined that a student with an IEP does need access to technology, how we then build that into both the school-based and a district-based budget. And I don't know who's best placed to speak to that, whether it's the Secretary Treasurer or the Superintendent or a combination, but I'll turn it over to whomever is best.
Chair, I can start answering that question. I think what we'll find is that IT right now is seeking feedback from schools. Included in that feedback is this exact question. How are we going to best serve students with IEPs who need technology, and how to incorporate that into our resourcing of technologies for schools. So if possible, it would be great if we could put that question on hold until they've collected that information back from the schools. I believe it'll be it's close to the end of February when we'll have that back, and then we'll be able to feed that back to the board, all of that feedback, and put some recommendations forward that can be considered for the next budget year.
You know, that's great. Outside of the budget consideration, I appreciate that that's some ongoing work that's going to come to the board around how we budget for it on an ongoing basis from a planning perspective. Is there anything from a practice perspective? So like when we're looking to establish an IEP and we align that IEP with also some technology needs, how is that sort of determined? What are the processes that happen at a school-based level or perhaps at a district-based level to identify that need for a student?
Thank you through the chair. So based on the designation and the needs of the student, the conversation would happen with the case manager as well as the school-based team around what requirements beyond technology or including technology are there to assist the student in their learning, and in what elements they need those in. Some may need it in a specific subject area, some may need it to communicate, and others may need it for a variety of reasons. So in combination and in collaboration, I think with the case manager, the assessments that come back, the individual student needs and the parent involvement that should be placed into the IEP. And then that should come back into the school in order to appropriately support. I think the new information that we'll have is more specific to perhaps an additional allocation for schools based on students. I think in the past with the technology that was available in schools, I don't think that it was specific. So it was, unless it was an iPad that was used for augmentative communication, then the Chromebooks were there for use for students. I think moving forward, we do need to understand specifically individual student needs so that there is an allocation built into that resourcing.
Thank you, Superintendent. Okay, so we'll look forward to that further information and discussion in February. Any other trustee questions? Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
It's actually more just follow up to your question and more regards to technology in general. I know in the past there's been some discussion about pedagogy and the correct and appropriate time and use of technology. And I just wondered if we'd given any more thought to that, if that was something that was still kind of on the board for discussion at some future event.
Superintendent, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, thank you through the chair, and that's a great question, Trustee Kwan. That is part of the feedback that we'll be looking to receive from staff committees as well as school-based teams. So that should come back to the board.
Wonderful. Okay. All right, folks, I'm going to move us along in our agenda then to the Secretary Treasurer's report under E2. Again, there's a recommended motion to receive the Secretary Treasurer's report as presented. Secretary Treasurer, I'll turn the floor over to you to highlight anything from your report that you wish.
Not a lot to highlight there, just touching on the student connections meeting. So in that month, a little bit more than a month, they had 10 of those meetings, which we'll speak to more shortly. But I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on anything that's included in the report.
Thank you very much. Just opening the floor then. Does anyone have any questions for the Secretary Treasurer? Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Less of a question. I just wanted to highlight how much the Secretary Treasurer has done with the student connection meetings. The student connection meetings were at least an hour and a half to 2 hours each, and she took notes at every single meeting and filled up a notebook and collated it all into what we have in pack-ups. And I think even so, even further looking at the budget development process that we have here, as well as all of the, some of the preliminary items that we see in our package. And I think that speaks also to our associate secretary treasurer and our, I'm sorry, I don't know her vendor's title, but I think there's been a lot of work done by the finance team. So just wanted to highlight that and say thank you. It's been a great process, so thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. And yeah, I would echo those sentiments. Hugely important piece of work that will really benefit the board and partners as we move forward in our budget deliberations. All right. Anything else in terms of the Secretary Treasurer's report before I look to a mover and a seconder to receive it? Okay, trustees, may I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Bayo, and a seconder. Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor with a show of hands, again, just receiving the report. And that is unanimous. Thanks very much, trustees. Okay, so we're moving on to B. This is the 2025-2026 budget update. Secretary Treasurer, I'll turn the floor over to you when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. So the first item up is the initial 2025-2026 budget feedback survey results. So included in the agenda package is a little bit of background around the survey, as well as the questions and some themed responses. So first of all, this is a survey that was launched on November 26th. It was launched on the district website and on social media. And then on November 28th, there were email invitations sent out to 4 houses, all of the education partners, BPVPA, which is Principals and Vice Principals Association, exempt staff, and also out to school administration for them to send out to their school communities. And the survey stayed open until December 13th at 4 o'clock. And we received 393 responses. So just so you're aware, the key themes have been provided in the public meeting, but the detailed responses have been provided directly to trustees so they can read each individual comment that was made. The first question that was asked was around a connection to the school district, and parents topped off the list at just under 70% of the respondents. Next in line, staff being 25%, and then the remainder were 3% and under. For staff, it was interesting to see the variety there. So this question was around which employee group we belong to, and just over 60% were GVTA. just over 17% QP 947, and QP 382 and principals and vice principals at 7.2, exempt at 6.1, and then contract employee 1%. And other, so we have an employee who's in both QP 382 and QP 947. And question 3 in the survey was receiving input regarding the focus areas of the Enhanced Student Learning Report. So those are literacy, numeracy, mental health and well-being, career development, and early years. We also received some feedback outside of those areas, which were included in a section called Other. And question 4 was a question asking about areas of budget needing more investment, and I've included them there, themed out with some items underneath in alphabetical order. And that was around extracurricular and exploratory, facilities and maintenance, human resources, mental health and well-being, safety and security, teachers and classroom, and technology. And then lastly was an open-ended question around whether or not there were any additional comments that they wanted to make. And we got some comments around funding allocation and transparency. mental health and well-being, safety and security, and teachers in classrooms. So I won't read all of the items that are listed there. I'll allow you that reading pleasure, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there's anything that needs clarification. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer. Okay, I'll just open the floor up again to trustees and our partners if you have any questions in relation to this item. With our thanks, Secretary Treasurer. I don't see any hands. I'm going to move us on. We are at F, question period. So this again, folks, this is a 15-minute standing item in all of our board meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, Secretary Treasurer, did I miss? Was there a recommended motion? Go ahead.
There's just 3 more items underneath that
Oh
one.
my goodness. Thank you for stopping me while I move full steam ahead. Yeah, I'm sorry. 3 very important items that we do not want to gloss over. Go ahead whenever you're ready. And thank you for pausing in between.
Thank you. So the next one is regarding the student connections meetings. They were on-site meetings at the schools. This year we added middle to the list. So we did middle and secondary, and that includes SJ Burnside. So 18 schools attended by trustees, members of senior leadership team, lots of students, and often school administrators. The schools this year were provided some guiding questions. There's a variety of ways in which those questions were used. Some of the schools who were up right at the beginning didn't have a lot of time. Other schools took the questions and created a curriculum for their advisory blocks and ended up doing a whole teaching session on government. And so it was very interesting receiving feedback from all of the students in these sessions. As Trustee Kwan mentioned, I did take detailed notes from each of the meetings. Those notes have been provided directly to trustees, so they have the detailed notes. And then included in the agenda package today are a summary of key themes in no particular order. And I did end up combining them for middle and secondary, more around time constraints. It's a lot of feedback to try to compile. So you'll see some of the lists are really long, but it was challenging to try to combine them. So have a read through. It's really interesting feedback that we've received from students, everything from mental health, sexual health, substance use, menstrual products coming up again, nutrition breaks and access to food, safety, network and technology, lots of comments on facilities, extracurricular activities, supplies and equipment, equity, student support, curriculum and reporting, had some thoughts on AI, and also recommendations around engagement and access to budget information as students. So again, I'll leave it at that. I think it's a good one if you want to take a read through, and if you need clarity on anything, just let me know. Thanks.
Thank you again, Secretary Treasurer. Any questions, comments, thoughts in relation to the student connections? Trustee Kwan, go ahead, and then Trustee Painter.
Yeah, I think from my attendance, I tried to hit most of the middle schools. I wasn't able to be at all of them, but thank you to a couple of my colleagues who were able to fill in as well. But you know, from my perspective, the one thing that really stood out to me was, you know, we had a list of guiding questions, and one of the questions we get to is, first of all, you know, where would you spend money if you had it? But then we get to the question where, you know, if you, now that we've spent that money, where are you going to take it from? Because we don't actually get any more. So how are we going to reallocate funds? And interestingly enough, there was never reallocating from somewhere else. It was always, how are we going to raise those funds? How are we going to get more? So I thought that was very interesting. And in that thought process, actually, my mind goes directly to perhaps there is, and I know we do this as a board and would like to see it done more, is, advocacy and the letters that we're sending. And I think perhaps some of what we're hearing out of these student connection meetings can be used in any kind of advocacy or letters that we're writing to the ministry. So I think it's a good opportunity to take some of this feedback directly from students and communicate that to the minister as well.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Yeah, great idea. Trustee Painter.
I just wanted to express my appreciation to Secretary Treasurer, district staff, and also to school staff who put the time in to make these meetings possible. The few that I was able to attend, I learned new things every time. Found out questions or issues that I didn't even have questions about before, which I don't know what that says, but it was appreciated to learn from the students. And I think at the core of these are the consumers of our services. And so it's so important to actually understand what's working for them and what isn't. So I can't say enough about just how worthwhile these meetings were. And I look forward to an enhanced student voice going forward.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Any other comments, thoughts, questions in relation to the student connections? Okay, Secretary Treasurer, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. We're now moving on to staff options, expenditures, and reductions. This came up in the development of the 2025-2026 process, and the board requesting that staff bring forward some recommendations for expenditures and reductions as early as possible in the process, with the purpose of being able to ensure there's adequate time to engage in dialogue about priority investments, but also ensure that they align with our strategic goals, or in some cases meet our legislative requirements, but also to gain a deeper understanding of the potential impacts of any proposed reductions. So just starting off, we took a look at where we're at with the projected deficit for 25-26. You may not recall, but we created a multi-year financial plan that was approved by the board in September that projected a deficit of 1.9 million for next year. Around the same time or on the same day, the board approved using 1.8 million surplus that was available at the end of the 23-24 year to help offset that deficit. So we were left with a 0.1 million deficit, which is wonderful compared to 1.9 million. However, it's very, very early in the process to look at a projected deficit. And we're just in the process, I say we, but it's really Julie and her team are completing the final budget for 24-25, and they're identifying items that are impacting us this year that are likely or absolutely will impact us next year. And so just to find a starting place, made adjustments for known items, so things that we know will impact the budget next year. It's brought our deficit up, not a huge amount, but we're up to 0.3 million, so just over 300,000. And as I mentioned, really important to understand that we're very early. So that's the caveat about bringing this forward early, is that so much can change between now and April when the budget is approved, but it is a starting place. So we'll put that out there. So the process that we undertook to identify priority investments is that we had meetings with both department leaders and also school principals to discuss the 2025-2026 budget. And we asked department leaders to identify unavoidable costs resulting from, in some cases, inflation, others legislative changes, as well as resources and initiatives to meet their operational goals, goals that are in alignment with the strategic plan, and then also looking for potential areas of saving. And then we also asked school principals what resources and initiatives were needed to better support equity deserving students while considering school goals and the strategic plan. So we received all of that feedback and we added up all of the priority investments and the reductions that were proposed, and our 0.3 million deficit increased to 2.8 million. So obviously, lots of need for investment from the departments to achieve those operational goals and also to improve outcomes for students. So obviously, we couldn't bring that forward to the board. We revisited what had been presented as priority items and asked them to reprioritize or see if there's something that could come off the list, or if it was an absolute priority, could they find savings within their area to offset that addition. And the list came back and we made a few adjustments, but you'll see the list included in the agenda package on page 51. It ended up being just under 1 million. And I can go through the individual items. I don't know how well I can speak to everything, but there are people here we may be able to add. But also we provided a rationale for each item in the memo. And that's starting on page 52 and it goes through till page 54. So each item has a rationale attached to it. Ideally, we would have been able to bring back additions with reductions that would balance to zero. So that work is still ongoing because it's a lot easier to find things to add to the budget than it is to find things to take away. And so we continue to work on that, and also recognizing that we are really early. So conversations about reductions are challenging to have, and I think we want to just get additional feedback from our education partners. We have meetings that are set up starting tomorrow and next week to get some thoughts on the items that are here. We're also really looking for feedback from trustees as well on priority areas or areas that we may need to look at for reduction. And so just considering all of those things first before we try to bring back a set balanced budget. The other thing is, actually, let's just go quickly through the list here. So if you look on page 51, we have some one-time reductions. Aviation program, that was a reduction that was there last year, and there's been some challenges. Again, this year finding an instructor for a teacher for that program, so it's on the list for 1 more year. There's some software. I won't give an explanation for everything. I'll just go through it or it will take too long. But there's the software one time it was paid in advance, technology replacement reserve, student device purchases and repairs. And if you're wondering why there's a reduction for that, this is if we maintain our current ratios, that's what we could give up out of our budget for next year. If the board decides to alter those ratios based on the recommendations made by IT, then those funds may be needed, or we may even need more than that. So just keep that in mind. There's a 1.0 painter, and that's coming off, but it's in exchange for a 1.0 electrician. And that's due to some legislative requirements to do monthly fire alarm testing. We heard strong messaging from students and schools around the impact of the school supplies on schools. And so we've added back 50% of the previous year's reduction. I think it was 20% reduction last year, so we've added half of it back. We heard from principals around the challenges of being in a school without a vice principal, so adding that back to the 4 small schools. We've added some teacher collaboration time at 4 priority schools, 0.1 FTE at each, a total of 0.4. And also extracurricular coordinator around student mental health and wellness, 0.1 at elementary and a 0.1 at middle. And then there's a few supply increases for facilities. They've been hugely impacted by inflationary costs. So you see network and communications, that's around wireless access, custodial supply, ground supply. And then there's some software for IT for different purposes, including cybersecurity, which is much needed in our district. And then lastly is the appropriation of the prior year surplus. So that's the list that we put forward, but there's another section in the memo around holding space for other identified priorities. And I make mention in the memo around the mandate letter that the minister received from the premier, and that is emphasizing teachers and schools having access to additional supports, such as more EAs and counseling resources. So what we're hoping is that there may be some additional funding tied to that, but we won't actually know until mid-March. So just want to hold space for that. It's also a message that we heard pretty clearly in the survey results and also from students. And so following the items that we've identified as priorities is another list. And we'd also want to hold space for the list that was created by the departments, things that they felt were of their highest priority. And you can see the list on page 54. So that is facility services has quite a few things that are listed there, including daytime custodians and more supplies, also a dump truck. And HR is identifying some personnel related expenses that they need. There's busing costs are increasing and also a need for specialized equipment and inclusive education. Information technology, again, more cybersecurity software that is a priority, upgrade to the district website, and technology infrastructure. And then we've put a note there around student devices, that being a future conversation. And we've also identified under privacy management the need for a privacy officer to handle the new legislative changes that have come in. And I'll just make a comment around capital funding. So the dump truck, for example, or student devices, when we get closer to finalizing the budget, we may want to consider if we have any capital funding that might be available to fund those, which would free up operating funding to be used for other purposes. And I think I've already mentioned around the reductions that work is ongoing. And we will be considering, we got all the survey results, the student connections fairly recently as well. So we're still continuing to work through that to determine what we can pull out of that. Partner meetings I've already mentioned at BPVPA meeting, but also we have a public consultation meeting that's coming up in early March where we can receive additional feedback. Yeah. And we will bring back any updated recommendations. There's some things that were in progress that we may want to bring to the board as well. So we'll continue to bring that forward for your consideration as they become available. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer. Appreciate you walking us through the staff options as they stand currently. And certainly these this part of the memo will be particularly helpful for both the board and the partners when we connect. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Hopefully just a quick question, with regards to, you know, the projected budget deficit, even without the changes. I'm just curious, we're looking at the supply budget that was cut last year by 20%. And correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that was a one-time reduction, but so we're adding 50%. It wasn't a one-time reduction? Okay. But there was some other things that were one-time reductions. And I think like even school-based budgets, that was a couple of one-time reductions. I think it was 2 years in a row, but they were considered one-time. I'm just curious as to whether that's all been added back as well already.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Secretary Treasurer.
Yeah, so all of the one-time items that were approved last year have been added back and are already incorporated into here.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments in relation to this aspect? Yeah, Trustee Painter, go ahead.
Well, first off, this is clearly a ton of work, and in general, I'm just really impressed with how much work has already gone into considering the budget so far and getting feedback from staff and others, including the students. My challenge is that right now, and the other point is I recognize wholeheartedly how much of a moving target this is, especially when we won't know what the ministry budget allocations are for quite some time. My biggest concern, though, is that we've identified priority funding that puts us almost $1 million into a deficit situation. And we haven't identified what potential trade-offs might have to be made. And looking back at this and wanting to get a sense of choices early on was driven primarily to ensure that we had adequate time for having those conversations about the cuts, about the trade-offs going forward. This is really good information, but if we were to go to any of our stakeholder groups or to our rights holders for feedback, they're still not understanding what they're going to potentially lose and what the trade-offs for the targeted funding are going to be. And I recognize, again, a moving target. In my mind, we should be looking for a ranked list of things that we can live with down to things that we can't, and get to a point so that when we get to an understanding what the budget allocations are, when we get a clear understanding of our student projections and everything else, and we can actually get much more precise about that, then it's more a matter of going down the list and saying we need 6 of these things as opposed to 12. But at least then we can have a conversation about ranking where our stakeholders and where the board and everyone else can envision accepting reductions. And that's the big challenge, because right now we don't have anything to have a conversation about. We can talk about this and it's a good conversation, but it doesn't move us any closer to a budget decision. And that's my challenge right now.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Any other thoughts or questions that we want to surface this evening in relation to this part of the Secretary Treasurer's report? Okay, I'm going to move us on to the last item, the 2025-2026 budget development process. Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you, Chair. Just included in the agenda package as I'll be doing each month, the budget development process, the timeline. And just updating it with any changes that have been made and also the status. So there've been just a few minor changes. So I didn't put a motion forward to accept it because it's really just dates that have changed. So the first one was the Esquimalt Student Connections. There was a date change there. I've added in the dates for the partner and BPVPA meetings that were known at the time the agenda package went out. And those are from January 28th to February 7th. And then I adjusted the IEC because we had some earlier dates on there that had been proposed. And now we know that the first meeting is on February 11th. And then I believe that there's meetings in March and April, but I don't know the dates. So those are included on there. And then also in the first column, just included the status. So if items were completed or still in progress. So it's just there for your information, and I will continue to provide that as we move through the process. So hopefully at the end, we'll have a final version that actually reflects what happened.
Thank you very much for the update. Any questions or thoughts around that, Trustee Painter?
No, thank you, Chair. So to feed on my last comment, when on this schedule can we anticipate having a list of trade-offs and understanding what the potential cuts might be so that we can get informed feedback from all of our stakeholders and rights holders? Like I noticed, for example, we have some budget updates in early March. That might be a really desirable time because it provides time over spring break for people to digest this and get their comments together so that when we do meet after spring break with the different groups, that they'll actually be in a position to provide comment on what the proposed trade-offs are.
Secretary Treasurer, go ahead.
Thank you through the chair. I'm just looking at the timeline, and given that we have a public meeting scheduled for March 4th, I'm just wondering if we should aim for the February 24th board meeting. Like, it's just a little bit earlier, but if we do have any options that we want public feedback on, it would be good if we could have them ready for the 4th. Otherwise, the 10th, we do have a public feedback time frame. So over spring break, we could get that feedback by email. So just either one of those options I think would work.
Yeah, Trustee Painter, you have a follow-up?
No, thanks. Those timings would work for me. I'm always going to be in favor of sooner is better, but both of those dates would be useful for me and provide time for our stakeholder groups and rights holders to develop some comments. Well, thank you very much.
Great, thank you both. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I for me, it's just around on April 11th, we have communication, a budget bulletin or newsletter. I know that's on there, I think, at the board's request with regards to being a bit more transparent and trying to get the information out. I think we said to parents, but I know with some of the student connection meetings that they're very interested to hear back as well. So thought that I would, just put it in there that we might want to have a further discussion as a board as to, how we want to do that and how we want to get the information back to students, now that we've met with them and they've had some feedback into what the budget would look like, that, some of what we've done. So just a curiosity as to, I think it's captured in there, but, perhaps maybe we want to think about how, as a board, when that discussion will happen, if that's going to be part of our public meeting or how that's going to. So
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Yeah, good point. Secretary Treasurer, do you see a natural place in the current schedule for undertaking that consideration about how it's communicated back to students?
They had quite a few suggestions on how to do that, but if we already have April 11th as budget bulletin newsletter, we could just incorporate a version for students. It is extra work. We might need to check on the timing if April 11th is going to be possible, given that the budget's just passed 2 days prior. So we might need a little bit more time if we're doing 2 different bulletins, but I'm sure we could work with communication specialists to see what we could do ahead of time.
All right, sounds good. Trustee Bio, go ahead.
I was just gonna reiterate what Trustee Kwan was saying. I attended one of the student connections, and that was a huge point that they had, and they were saying, like, can you send it to our emails? Can you send it to our teachers so that they can go with it through us, or through it with us so we can discuss? And then they asked for an avenue to feedback to us their thoughts about our decisions. So yeah, there was a lot of drive. That group I was meeting this was across age groups of the middle school. Yeah, there was so much interest in being continually involved in the process. It was excellent.
That's wonderful to hear. Trustee Painter.
On that note, I was just wondering if there might be value in sharing the student connections meeting summaries to provide that feedback of what we heard and how it was distilled down at this point, recognizing, of course, trustees have it all and we'll be reading everything. But that might be useful feedback for now.
My suggestion is that we perhaps surface that at our next in-camera meeting, because it would have to be voted out through the appropriate process.
No, sorry, my proposal was the abridged public version to go out as opposed to.
Sorry, I misunderstood, Trustee Painter. Okay, yeah. Secretary Treasurer, do you have any thoughts on what further details could be provided in terms of the specific feedback and the detailed notes?
My thoughts were that we were going to share the detailed notes with the principal of the schools, but not with the intention that that would necessarily be shared out to the school community. But we certainly could share with them this memo with the themes and the items that are listed there that could be shared out with the students at all of the schools.
That would be great. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments, questions in relation to this last item around the process? All right. Thank you very much to the Secretary Treasurer and to everyone who's contributed to the conversations. And yeah, I just want to again acknowledge all the work to get us to this point, and offer again our gratitude. We look forward to meeting with all of our partners during our connections. Okay, so now we are at question period. So again, just want to highlight process here. So again, this is a 15-minute item that's a standing item on all board meeting agendas. During the 15 minutes, we offer 1 question per requester, and we will go through. I will attempt to answer whatever I can, and if I can't answer it, I will turn the question over to our staff. If both myself and staff cannot answer the question this evening in the meeting, then we'll endeavor to come back with an answer offline. Okay, so just bear with me a second. I'm just going to go to my inbox. I think we do. Yes, we do. We do have questions. Okay. We have a number of questions tonight. The first one is, am I correct to understand that the reason you, the board, submitted 2 other safety plan drafts was because the board was concerned that draft A would not be approved by the minister, by the education minister? So we set out the reasons for submitting 2 alternative safety plans for the minister's considerations. So 2 alternatives in addition to the board's preferred safety plan. It's in all of our kind of reasoning is in the background memorandum, which is available on the website. If you go to the homepage and search for the update that was provided on the 6th of January, you'll see both a statement and then a link to all of the relevant documents, including the memorandum, and then copies of each of the versions of the safety plan. Schedule A is the further revised draft safety plan, which is the board's preferred plan. And then Schedule B and C are the alternative plans for the minister's consideration. And then at Schedule D is the implementation plan approved by the board. Just bear with me a second. Go to the next question. The next question is, in the January 13th Ed Policy meeting, Nicole Duncan stated that they had help writing the draft update to Policy 5145. Who was it that helped? So I didn't suggest that we had help drafting it. That was a draft that was developed in-house, but we did have comments and some advice from BC Civil Liberties, and the board also received advice, legal advice. Okay, the next question. Where were the fee schedules for the current year published for elementary and middle schools in SD61? I just want to clarify. So sorry, I'm going to go to the beginning of this question just to give some context. So policy 6160 states, the Board of Education will ensure the schedule of fees and deposits required is published prior to the beginning of the school year and is available to students and parents' guardians. Where were the fee schedules for the current year published for elementary and middle schools in SD61? Okay, so with that further clarification, I'm going to turn to our staff to respond to that question.
I can respond to that question. We have had a very similar question come up previously. We included it in a frequently asked question FAQ document that was recently sent to schools. It referenced Section 82 of the School Act, which is what this policy is referencing. It's the same language. When we looked into this, it's basically at the school's discretion how they publish and communicate those fees to students and parents. When we did a quick survey of schools as to how they met this requirement, there's a variety of responses. So they had summer mail-outs to homes in some cases, handouts to students to take home from school. Some post them on their website. Some include them in newsletters that are emailed to parents and caregivers. And then others just use the KEV School Cash Online to have all of the fees, applicable fees listed. So there's a variety of ways in which this is met.
Secretary Treasurer. Okay, I'm going to move to our next question. When will the board meetings be in person so viewers can participate and trustees can be present? So we've also addressed this question a few times, and it's really down to a couple of things. One, upgrades to our boardroom to allow for the ability to properly hear who is speaking. And so those upgrades are being done in stages, and the superintendent recently submitted a plan to address the costs associated with those upgrades. But the ability for the public to participate is the same. And so Although the public can't be there in person, the same mechanisms to participate in a board meeting are still available virtually. So namely, to submit a question during question period is one option. That would be the same ability in person, but you'd be submitting it on paper, is how we did it in person. And the other option is to, again, present a request to present to the board. Otherwise, the participants around our board table during a public board meeting are the representatives from our partner groups and rights holders who participate. I guess the only other thing I would say is perhaps just provide the superintendent an opportunity to, if there is any update that could be provided around timing for the upgrades to the boardroom. I want to open that up to you, superintendent, if there is any update.
I thank you through the chair. We have ordered the furniture. We're just waiting for it to be delivered, which would be the first stage of altering the boardroom so that we can make it a more usable space.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have Associate Superintendent Arts. Is there just one more question, or is that it?
Thank you through the chair. Correct. There's just one more question that came, and I have forwarded that to you.
Okay. Just bear with me while I find it. Here we go. Okay, so the question is, when can the public expect to see the special advisor's report who was brought in to guide the trustees on revising the safety plan? I'm not sure that we can answer that question. We haven't seen the report, and so I'm not really sure how that will, or if that will be shared. I think it's a good question. Maybe I'll turn to staff to see if they know more than I do about that. Superintendent, is there anything that you can provide in the way of how and if that report will be shared?
No, thank you through the chair. Nothing further to report.
Thank you, Superintendent. Okay, so we've reached the end of question period, subject to the Associate Superintendent just confirming that we're good. Okay. All right, thank you very much to all the requesters for taking the time to submit questions for us. Just going back to our agenda, we have one public disclosure of in-camera items under G1. That's there for your information. We don't have any new business items this evening. I just want to check in with my colleagues to see whether you have any notices of motion or motions to share this evening. No? Okay. Then that leads us to the conclusion of our agenda. And again, I'll look to my colleagues for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Trustee Gagnon, and a seconder. Thank you, Trustee Bayo. All those in favor with a show of hands. And that is unanimous. Good night, everyone. Thanks so much. Take care.